Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. It is right now 2 p.m. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for everyone else to join in. We'll start at 2:05.
Hello. Hello.
Hi, Beth. Hi. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll start the webinar in 3 minutes. I'm just going to mute everyone for now and then unmute. Yes, thank you.
Great. Bye.
Hi everyone, it is right now 2:05. Thank you to everyone for joining the Refugee Sponsorship Training program today for this webinar and Refugee Sponsorship Training Program and United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees for today's webinar. My name is Paris Du, and I am the Blended Visa Office Referred Worker at the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. I am here with Teresa Hazik, a Resettlement Associate with United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and Beth Similia, who is part of a sponsoring group where their mandate is to sponsor refugee women through the Blended Visa Office Referred Program. I will be recording today's webinar, so if you would like to get a copy, please let me know at the end of the webinar. The webinar will also be available on RSTP's YouTube channel, so feel free to check our YouTube channel for the webinar. We decided to organize a webinar that focuses on refugee women on this day because, as many of you know, today is an International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to everyone. This day, as you know, is marked on March 8th every year, and it's a major day of global celebration of women. In different regions, the focus of the celebration ranges from general celebration of respect, appreciation, and love towards women to a celebration for women's economic, political, and social achievements. Each year, March 8th is an opportunity to celebrate the contribution of women. However, while we celebrate today, we do not want to forget about many refugee women around the world looking for safety and a better life for themselves and their families. As such, we decided to conduct this webinar on this day to talk about what we can do to help. The agenda for today will start with Teresa Hazik. She will do a brief description of the profiles of women at-risk refugees, including those identified for resettlement by UNHCR. Then we'll have a discussion on the prospects of durable solution, including resettlement for women at-risk refugees. Then she will discuss, and then I will discuss and will provide an explanation as to how sponsors can help resettle women at-risk refugees through the BVOR program. Then Beth will share her experience sponsoring women at-risk refugees through the BVOR program. Then at the end, we'll have a question and answer period. At that point, I will unmute whoever that would like to ask the question so we can have more of an interactive discussion. I will now pass on the presentation to Teresa Hazik.
Hello, everyone, and happy International Women's Day from my side as well. My name is Teresa Hazik, and I work in the resettlement unit at the UN Refugee Agency here in Canada. Thank you also for your interest in the Blended Visa Office Referred Program. The success of this program is very important for our agency because it allows for additional refugees to be admitted to Canada, thanks to the generosity of the sponsors like you. Paris and I have done a number of similar webinars in the past, usually around specific nationalities, but today, as she explained, on the occasion of the International Women's Day, we are focusing on refugee women and girls and specific challenges they face. So my part of the presentation will focus on who we are, which are the populations we are helping. A few slides will touch base on the staggering numbers of refugees in the world, as well as the composition of these populations, availability of durable solutions and resettlement being only one of them, Briefly on our side, how the process works overseas. And I will then finish my part of the presentation with some of the more typical profiles that we have been seeing in the past few years. And we know these are currently some of the women and girls that we have in the process with Canada that may be posted as blended visa office referred. So let's start. United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UN Refugee Agency, we are one of the UN agencies. We belong to the UN family. We've been created in 1950 with a goal to find solutions for some 2 million Europeans after the Second World War. And at the time, we had a 3-year mandate with a hope that the solutions will be found and there won't be a need for a refugee agency anymore. Unfortunately, some 67 years later, we are still around trying to assist and find solutions for many refugees whose numbers continue to grow as various conflicts around the world persist and new conflicts appear. We are a non-political and humanitarian organization. We deliver life-saving assistance, and in addition to that, we also try to safeguard fundamental human rights, such as the right to seek asylum. We are mostly funded by governments, about 90%, but more and more we also need to rely on the funds provided by private donors, as these donations also help fund critical operations that we deal overseas. So, in addition to refugees for whom we care and asylum seekers, so these two populations are our core persons of concern. And like a very brief difference between asylum seekers and refugees would be asylum seekers would be people who, due to the conflict, cross the border and seek asylum somewhere else. They're in the process of getting an asylum. And refugees would be those who have actually passed through that process, a series of interviews, and have been confirmed or granted refugee status in a country of asylum. There are other populations that we also look after. Stateless people, returnees would be refugees who, once the conflict has gone, decide to go back, internally displaced, and in some very limited situations also people who have been displaced due to natural disasters. In terms of global numbers, and here you will see the numbers from 2016, the numbers are overwhelming. In a couple of months, we will have new figures for 2017, and we know already that these numbers will grow. In the last year, we've had this horrible crisis in Bangladesh with Rohingya refugees, more than 500,000 people on the move. So overall, all forcibly displaced people together are more than 65 million people. Refugees count for 22.5. Some of our colleagues are already using the figure of 23 million people. These numbers include also Palestinians, and some 17 million people are under our mandate if we exclude the Palestinians. However, the worst part of this, these numbers is the fact that the trends are growing, they're not declining. The conflicts are not getting resolved, and there is no political solution or peace in many of the crises around the world. For example, if you become a refugee or anyone becomes a refugee tomorrow, it is very likely that that person will remain a refugee for the next 20 years or even more. Apparently, 26 years is the average duration of a protracted refugee situation. So you here on this slide, you see, you know, that this trend of growing. And I said also I will say a few words about the composition of these people. So half of the 22.5 refugees around the world are under the age of 18. And if we are looking at the gender distribution, half of them are women and girls. This is our topic today. Humanitarian crises around the world trigger protection risks for everybody, but particularly so for women and children. Some studies find that more than 70% of women experience sexual and gender-based violence in crisis settings. What we see in the field is a significant rise in the numbers of female-headed households in conflict situations. We also know that women and girls' health and education suffer. For example, 60% of preventable maternal mortality is taking place in the forced displacement settings. On the education side, statistics from our UNESCO colleagues tells us that adolescent girls in conflict zones are 90% more likely to drop out of school compared to the girls in other conflict-free countries like Canada or elsewhere. And this is only to start with the fact that in the first place, the enrollment of girls in the secondary schools is particularly worrisome for refugee girls because they're only half as likely to attend secondary schools compared to boys. Very often, social and cultural conventions will prioritize refugee boys over girls by their own families. And sometimes in other situations, families will have protection concerns to send girls to schools if it's too dangerous for them to simply, get to school. We've released today a great report on the occasion of the International Women's Day that's called Her Turn. It's time to make refugee girls' education a priority. So feel free to contact me after the webinar. I will share the link if anyone is interested to read. On our side, of course, we are committed to uphold the rights of women and girls in terms of equal access to services and full participation in the decisions that affect their lives and the lives of their families and communities, and in particular to be free from sexual and gender-based violence, including exploitation and abuse. In many places, these basic freedoms and rights are only a dream for many women and girls. And in many places where the only durable solution in terms of saving lives is resettlement, our agency can often play a key role. So this slide just outlines when we talk about solutions, what solutions mean in terms of the forced displacement. There are three: voluntary repatriation, local integration, or resettlement. And when conflicts last for so long, as I mentioned, simply some of these solutions are not viable. Voluntary repatriation is supposed to be done in safety and dignity when the situation allows for the return. If there are no political solutions, it's impossible to organize a safe return. If the development aid is not available, it's also very hard for people to decide to return to their homes. Local integration in terms of both legal, economic, and social and cultural is extremely limited. We don't have such a problem in Canada. People integrate. However, most of the world's refugees are hosted in developing regions and developing countries. Some 86% of refugees are actually in the developing world. And meaning that those countries are poor and their local populations struggle. Just if I go back to this previous slide and you look at this slide here, it is basically the picture of a host tribe, Turkana tribe in Kakuma camp, where we have recently had a huge influx of refugees from South Sudan. I'm coming back to this slide to speak a bit more about resettlement. Resettlement as a solution is a very limited solution because we depend on the international community to provide spaces so that we can recommend people to go somewhere else, to a third country. We use resettlement as a tool for protection in terms of, life-saving intervention, and also to find a durable solution for the individuals. Currently, we have some 36 countries participating in various resettlement programs. But what is really worrisome is the huge gap between the needs and the offers we get from states such as Canada, US, Australia, European Union, and so forth. This next slide basically speaks to this gap. If you remember, I showed you a slide with that shows that there are some 17 million refugees under UNHCR mandate. So what happens is that every year our field operations go through the analysis of the needs of these people who are registered with us. We have information about them. And the analysis basically looks for specific needs and vulnerabilities. And we come up with projections of, what would be the number of people that we absolutely need to resettle and move somewhere else for their safety. And last year's numbers for this year, the projections were 1.2 million. And this is something that's, impossible to achieve. That these people are, just because, we don't have that many spaces available. These people could be, survivors of torture, someone who is threatened with a forcible return to the country of origin, someone whose child is sick, or a woman or a girl at risk. I will let you see this video, a bit depressing, but it's short. So I'll just let it play, and so I say depressing because the solutions are so, spaces are so scarce, right? It shows us the reality we face in terms of the availability of spaces. We know some countries have completely suspended their programs, like Denmark, or significantly reduced the numbers, like the US. So today, more than ever, it's extremely important for us to use all additional places for these vulnerable individuals, such as those provided under the Blended Visa Office Referred Program. So hopefully, with your help and generosity, we will get there. These are the Canadian numbers, just in terms of the projected arrivals, and I won't stay long here, but I just want to point a significant difference. UNHCR only refers towards government-assisted or blended visa office referred program. So for this year, these two programs combined are only 9,000 people, or more specifically 1,500 under the blended visa program. So I know Paris will speak a bit about that as well, so I won't stay here long. Moving on to the explanation of how resettlement selection process works on UNHCR side. So if you can imagine a situation where someone is forced to flee their country, maybe because of the conflict, or maybe because of a specific persecution they're facing in their own country, maybe because they are politically active in a totalitarian regime, maybe because of their religion or a race or gender, they find themselves most likely in a neighboring country. As I said, the majority of them are in a developing world. So this is the part, they need access to asylum, access to a system that will allow, some normalcy of life. In many countries, UNHCR is that point of access for many refugees. We will ensure that people are met, the information is taken about who they are and what they are fleeing from. This is what we call registration process. Usually some documents are issued to people. And then they go through the process of, being recognized as refugees. And this is very theoretical when you look like that. And there are different political situations and different situations in states. Somewhere we have a local system where the government makes decisions. Somewhere it's UNHCR. But in any case, refugee status determination process is, hearings and interviews with UNHCR protection officers who then decide whether a person has demonstrated a well-founded fear of persecution, if people are recognized. We will also know about what their specific needs are. And I talked about that a little bit. Have they gone, have they survived torture and violence? Have they been in jail? Do they have children with specific medical needs, or do they have medical needs? Are they disabled? So based on these elements, we will identify people as in need of resettlement and then prepare their files and submit them to countries that offer places to us. In the Canadian context, these would be the Canadian visa offices around the world, who then make their own decisions whether people are accepted or not. If they're accepted, they will channel them either through the government-assisted program or to the blended visa office referred program, where they need to be matched with sponsors like yourself. When we do our submissions, we usually try to kind of categorize submissions by these categories. And legal and physical protection needs, survivors of torture and violence, medical needs, women and girls at risk, very rarely family reunification, because in the Canadian context there are family reunification programs. Children and adolescents at risk. In the Canadian context, these would be only those children and adolescents who already have family in Canada. And lack of foreseeable alternative durable solutions, but this is really applicable to all of these categories. They don't really have any other solution than resettlement. So sometimes women and girls are submitted under other categories. So we can have a woman submitted under the first category, legal and physical protection needs, maybe because they are in detention, or maybe there is a real threat of a forcible return to the country of origin. Or we can submit women as survivors of torture and violence. When we say women and girls at risk, there are many women and girls who are also submitted under other categories, and this is not really so strict, depending on what best fits in terms of the description of the narrative of that particular individual. However, having said all that, here you can see the definition as per our handbook, who would be women and girls at risk. So women and girls who have protection problems particular to their gender and they lack effective protection normally provided by male family members. They usually suffer from a wide range of protection problems, sometimes ostracized by the community, subject to the threats of being forcibly refoulement, means forcibly returned to the country of origin, all other kinds of security threats, including sexual and gender-based violence, physical abuse, intimidation, torture, and then also economic hardship and marginalization, and hostility of the communities where they live, and all other kinds of exploitation. Here is one of the last slides, and I will kind of be here a bit longer, just because these are the examples you probably would like to hear about. Some of the profiles we have been seeing in the past, couple of years, but I've seen them. I've been with UNHCR for a number of years, and we are seeing these, unfortunately, profiles kind of in a cyclic. They repeat, in various regions and various countries, various nationalities. Victims of human trafficking, you know, some of the recent cases we had from Libya, Lebanon, Egypt, Ukraine. Sometimes these individuals are detained in these countries, and then when they are released, they're usually at very high risk of being re-trafficked. So it's extremely important to find spaces to move these people out of danger, women out of danger. Canada has accepted a number of Eritrean women who have been enslaved by ISIS for a very prolonged period of time last year. We have been very fortunate that most of these women came as government assisted. But I would expect that we will have similar cases of Eritrean women coming to Canada and may be referred under the blended visa office referred program. Domestic violence cases we see in often everywhere because countries who are in conflict don't have social and protection networks. Very often when families flee in the countries of asylum, it's the same. You know, there are no social networks that can address these issues. Domestic violence is exacerbated by the conflict. The traditional protection mechanisms fail. We've had a case of a woman who fled her country because she feared violence from her husband, who was unfortunately able to track her down in the other country, you know, a powerful male figure. Sometimes they're linked even with the regime in power. You know, they're very kind of, they can get to the women. In many asylum countries, we don't have safe houses. We need to move people quickly. And this is where resettlement can help. Women with disabilities are more at risk of exploitation. We had a case of a lady who was left blind after a car accident. And she was even before that a victim of domestic violence, and her disability, you know, was just kind of, you know, brought even more problems for her in the country of asylum. So resettlement was really the only option for her. Victims of sexual and gender-based violence, sometimes we have families. I remember one Congolese family with multiple female members being subjected to rape, and that particular family that I'm aware of, you know, they were subjected to sexual violence both in the country of origin and in the country of asylum. So obviously, cases like that would require some special needs and follow-up in terms of the settlement. Then girls, victims of forced marriage or honor killings. I have a very recent example of a young woman who was sold for marriage for 100 cows by her father. I just couldn't believe that these things still happen, but they do. She left her country, but unfortunately was chased by the paternal family, who kind of thought that, you know, this was bringing shame to the family, and the only solution was really to resettle her. She had to move several times in the country of asylum and couldn't find safety. So definitely that was, there are many examples of girls who are being forced or pushed into forced marriage. And we're seeing these negative coping mechanisms in the Middle East as well. Then women without traditional male protection in the household, you know, maybe because their husbands died or disappeared in the conflict, are of course at a particular risk of physical harm, discrimination, and abuse. It is difficult for families who are headed by women to integrate, So these would be some of the more kind of classic, what we consider women at risk cases. It will happen sometimes that women resort to survival sex, having really no other options to support the family. Then they get ostracized by the community because of that. And sometimes just maybe a perception of that, even though it's not what's happening, just because the woman is on her own, will bring conflict in the community and make her life miserable. So, to conclude, I would really like to encourage you. I hope I was able to convey the message about the needs we are having for these vulnerable populations, specifically women and girls, and would like to encourage you to engage in the Blended Visa Office Referred Program. For example, last year there were about 300 places that were left unused, these cases were not basically converted to the government-assisted programs, and it really means this is, we could have helped these people, but there was no interest, there was no matches, and we're really trying to explain that the need is there, that these are additional people that we would like to see helped. We would like the program to be used to the fullest potential. So women and girls in particular need your support and generosity. So every space counts. And I hope that you will engage in the program. And if you have done it in the past and you remain committed to the program, whichever, we from us at the UN Refugee Agency, we thank you very, very much. Over to you, Paristu.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for your excellent presentation and the detailed description of how your agency identifies women refugees and women at risk in particular. So I will continue the presentation. Before I start, I would like to first provide a little bit of information regarding Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. So RSTP is mandated and funded by the Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada, IRCC, to provide training and support to current and potential sponsoring organizations and groups. Our office is located in Scarborough, Ontario, but we service the whole country, excluding Quebec. Our office is also responsible for matching sponsoring groups with refugees coming to Canada through the BVOR program. I would like to also go over some of the acronyms we commonly use before we start the webinar. So in case you hear them during my presentation, you know what they are. So RSTP stands for Refugee Sponsorship Training Program. IRCC stands for Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada. And UNHCR is United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. BVOR is Blended Visa Office Referred Program. And GAR is Government Assisted Refugees. And SAWS are sponsorship agreement holders. So before I jump into what is the BVOR program, I would like to first put the program into a context for you as one stream within Canada's resettlement framework. This slide sets out the different programs along a spectrum of responsibility. So first we'll look at the government assisted refugee, this is a government funded program. The government assumes full responsibility for refugees coming through this stream. Refugees are referred to government by UNHCR, as Teresa mentioned. And as she mentioned, UNHCR refers refugees who are in need of resettlement, and the government of Canada takes the full financial responsibility, and the settlement support is provided by service providing organizations under the government funded resettlement assistance program, RAP. Private sponsors are not involved in this program. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Private Refugee Sponsorship Program, PSR program. The responsibility for sponsorship under this program lies within Canadian citizens or permanent residents organized into a sponsoring groups. I'm just going to take a moment. Sorry, I'm going to stop here and take a moment and put, I think some of you are unmuted and I'm hearing a lot of background noise. So I'm going to try to see if I can make sure that everyone is muted. Sorry, Teresa, do you mind muting yourself?
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much. And whoever else is unmuted, please mute yourself. I will unmute you at the end for question and answer period. It's just because I was hearing a lot of background noises and I wasn't sure if you guys can hear me clearly. Back to the privately sponsored refugee program. These refugees are actually, in fact, identified by sponsors, often through a family member living in Canada. In the PSR sponsorship, the sponsoring group or organization submit an application to IRCC, committing to provide a full financial and settlement support for 12 months. Then another resettlement program that Canada has is the Joint Assistance Sponsorship JAS program. Refugees sponsored under the JAS program are identified as having special needs that will likely result in a longer or more difficult period of integration. Under the Joint Assistance Sponsorship, the government provides the financial assistance to the refugees, while sponsoring group provide the settlement support. A JAS sponsorship is a 2-year commitment. Then we have the Blended Visa Office Referred Program, which is the program that I will be focusing on today. So the Blended Visa Office Referred Program is designed to resettle refugees identified by UNHCR and referred to Canadian visa offices. So what this means, as Teresa explained, UNHCR identifies refugees who are in need of resettlement and refer those refugees to the Canadian visa offices abroad. The Canadian visa offices receives the name of those individuals and they initiate eligibility check just to ensure that the referred individuals also meet the Canadian resettlement criteria. If they meet the eligibility criteria, then the visa office initiates an admissibility check, which is basically a set of criteria that a refugee must meet in order to be allowed to come to Canada. Admissibility checks consist of medical, security, and criminal checks. Medical checks are conducted to ensure the person that is coming to Canada does not have any medical condition that is considered a threat to Canadian public health and safety. And security and criminality checks are conducted to ensure that the person that is coming to Canada has not committed any serious crimes such as war crime. So once they do all the eligibility and admissibility check, the person becomes travel ready. So once they become travel ready, the visa office sends the information of those individuals to an office within IRCC in Ottawa, which is called Resettlement Operations Center, commonly referred to by the acronym ROCO. ROCO will then take that information and they will create a profile for those individuals. Then they will share the profile of those individuals with me here at RSTP. And at that point, I would have to find a sponsor for those profiles, for those cases. So by the time I receive the profiles of those individuals, I know that they're both eligible and admissible, and so I don't have to worry about any of those things. All I need to do is to find a sponsoring group for them. The program is called blended because it's a cost-sharing model. So the government and the private sponsoring groups share the financial responsibility for 1 year. The government provides the income support for 6 months of the year through what is called the resettlement assistance program, and the sponsors and private sponsors provide another 6 months of income support plus all of the startup costs. And by startup costs, I mean anything from putting a first and last for an apartment or furnishing an apartment. Sponsors are also responsible for the settlement support. That part is also not shared. So settlement support includes anything from receiving them at the airport, setting them up in an accommodation, enrolling them in language classes, and etc. Which I will get into that in more detail later on. But this part is not shared with the government, so as the startup costs. But the financial cost is actually shared with the government. So that's why the program is called the blended. So at this point, you may be wondering what is covered by the government when they're providing their financial support through the resettlement assistance program. The government provides for 6 months for food and incidentals. They provide for basic shelter on a monthly basis. They provide for transportation, and they also provide for maternity dietary allowances if applicable. It's important to note that these rates are based on the provincial social assistance rates. So up to now, I've talked about what is the BVOR program and and also discussed that it's a cost-sharing initiative between the government of Canada and private sponsors. At this point, you may be wondering, okay, well, who can sponsor and how can I get involved? There are currently three ways or streams that you can use to get involved. One is through a sponsorship agreement holder. Basically, these are incorporated organizations that have signed an agreement with the government of Canada to sponsor refugees. These are normally humanitarian faith-based organizations that again have signed agreement with the government to regularly sponsor refugees. So most sponsorships are done by the sponsorship agreement holders. Sponsorship agreement holders can also authorize groups to sponsor under their agreement, which they would be called their constituent groups. Another way is through a group of 5. So 5 Canadian or citizens or permanent residents can get together and sponsor a refugee or a refugee family. They must all be 18 years of age or older, and they must all reside within the same community as where the refugee is expected to settle. And the third way is through a community sponsor, which are any organization, association, or corporations. They don't have to be incorporated like the sponsorship agreement holders, but they have to be established as an organization. So BVOR program is meant to respond to the need of refugees in protracted refugee situation for 5 years or more in the same situation. As Teresa discussed in detail, UNHCR provides IRCC each year with a list of priority populations for resettlement. So for the year 2018, as Teresa discussed, the aim is to resettle 1,500 refugees from various populations. So these populations include Syrians, Iraqi, Iranian, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Congolese, Burundian, Sudanese, Somalian, Ugandan, Burmese, Colombian. So since the topic of discussion today is about women and women refugees, we have been receiving a lot of cases based on these population who either these cases where the principal applicant from these populations were women, or they were women in general, or they were specifically marked as women at risk. Right now, I have over 15 BVOR cases where there have where their principal applicant is a woman, or it is a woman in general, and she has applied with her family, or the profile has been marked as a woman at risk. So if you're interested to learn more about these profiles, please let me know after the webinar, and I can certainly share some details about these cases with you. So so at this point, you may be wondering how much does it cost to sponsor a refugee family through the BVOR program, or a refugee through the BVOR program. This slide shows the IRCC cost table for a private refugee sponsorship program, which can also be used for the BVOR program. This table illustrates the minimum amount of money required for sponsorship under the PSR program. But if you're sponsoring through the BVOR program, you're responsible for half of this amount. So let's look at the family size one. Under the income support, you will see that it's the minimum requirement is $10,700. So since you're sponsoring through the BVOR program, that $10,700 will be divided by half, because as you remember, 6 months of the financial support will come from the government. So you divide that 10,700 by half, but you're also responsible for the full startup costs. So that startup cost, 2,800, is not shared with the government. You as a sponsor are responsible for that. But the 10,700 under the 12 months of income support is shared with the government. The figures listed in this case tables are roughly equivalent to social assistance rates, and as you are probably aware, they are pretty inadequate. And in fact, the calculation IRCC used for its share of the financial support results in an amount that is not even half of these numbers. So therefore, it's very prudent to ensure that you have more than half of the amount listed for the size of family you are sponsoring, because the family will certainly need it. As mentioned earlier, only the financial responsibility is divided with the government. As a sponsor, you have a full settlement responsibility for 1 year, and the settlement responsibilities include welcoming the refugee family at the airport, providing orientation to them, explaining to them who you are, explaining to them the money flow, the budgeting, where they can buy groceries, how they can use transportation, arranging for temporary accommodation, or even helping them with finding a permanent accommodation, helping them to apply for provincial health care, helping them find a doctor, dentist, or other health services, helping them to enroll in adults English or French language classes, helping them with enrolling their children in school, helping them to apply for child tax benefit, helping them with opening a bank account, arranging for translator, or connecting them with job search services, and of course providing emotional and moral support. And I've been saying that you as a sponsor have the settlement responsibility to, and that settlement responsibility is not shared, but there are many resources available to help you with your settlement responsibilities, such as settlement agencies. So I highly recommend, when you're thinking of sponsoring a refugee or refugee family, it would be good to do some research and see what settlement agencies are available in your area and what resources or services they provide, so you can connect the newcomers with these resources when they arrive. It will assist you a lot in terms of with the settlement responsibility that you have as a sponsor for the duration of 1 year. So as you may recall, I mentioned that our office is, RSTP is also responsible for matching sponsors with refugees. So I receive a list of available cases from IRCC on the last Monday of each month, and I make them available to sponsorship agreement holders, groups of fives, and community sponsors. If you and your group want to participate as a group of five or a community sponsor, you would need to first complete a document called Request for a Refugee Profile. If you're thinking of working with a sponsorship agreement holder, you would have to look at find the sponsorship agreement holders in your area and connect with them, as each sponsorship agreement holder has its own rules and policies as to how they sponsor. If you need a list of the agreement holders, you can contact me. I can provide the list, but you can also find the list on IRCC's website. So again, going back to, if you're a group of five or a community sponsor, you would have to fill out the request for a refugee profile. And once I receive, you can get this request for refugee profile either on IRCC's website or from RSTP's website, or you can contact me and I can provide that information, that document to you. After I receive your request, the next step would be for you to participate in a BVOR orientation, which will explain in more detail as to what the BVOR program is all about, and you know, just familiarize you with the process. After the webinar, then I would send you an email which contains a link to the RSTP BVOR matching database, which is a system that allows you to view and select BVOR profiles. However, by the time you get to this point, we have been in touch already and we've probably become pretty good friends. So I will be explaining to you at that point how the system works. But for now, I just want to give you a picture of how the process works. Once you log into the matching database, you will be able to view the available BVOR profiles and place them on hold. Once you place a profile on hold, you will receive an extended profile that will provide you with more information about the profile that you have chosen. The idea is that this extended profile will provide enough information to you and your group so that you can decide whether or not you have the capacity to sponsor the refugees that you've put on hold. So once you receive the extended profile, you have about 3 days to decide as to whether or not you would like to sponsor a profile. However, I'm very flexible in terms of extension, as I understand that sometimes it takes more time for a group to get together to make a decision, and sometimes if the decision makers are away, and if your group needs more time, more than 3 days, please do not hesitate to let me know. If you decide not to proceed with the sponsoring a profile that you have on hold, you go back onto the matching database and you cancel the profile, and the profile will become available to other sponsoring groups. However, if you decide to proceed with the sponsorship, you come back to the matching database and you confirm the sponsorship. Once you confirm the sponsorship, I will also get an email that your group has confirmed, and at that point I will notify Rocco that you have confirmed the sponsorship, and they will send you all the required information to complete the documents. You can get the application forms from our website, www.rstp.ca. There are instruction guides there that you can use that provides tips for filling out each form. But we also have many people here at RSTP who can help you with filling out and reviewing the application forms. You can also grab the application forms from IRCC's website. So once you submit the application forms and your application forms are approved, then 6 to 12 weeks later, you will receive what is called a notice of arrival with detailed information about the refugees' arrival dates and flight information. And once the refugees arrive, they arrive as permanent residents. And so they have all the rights and responsibility as a permanent resident. And that point, the sponsorship obligations begins. Once they arrive, the local IRCC office will contact you shortly after to register them for the income support that the government provides. Teresa, I believe, did a great job in terms of explaining as to why you should get involved, but I would like to also emphasize that as Teresa mentioned, many of these refugees who have been referred to the BVOR program have been displaced and been living in a limbo for many years. Whether they're in a refugee camp or in an urban setting, they are in a protracted refugee situation, very often at risk. As Teresa explained, the resettlement is their only durable solution. So your participation in the BVOR program really does make a difference in someone's life, as that they cannot go back to their home country, they cannot stay where they are, and they need to be resettled, and that's why they have been referred. That brings me to the end of my presentation. We also have Beth here with us, who is a very experienced sponsor, and their mandate is to not to only, but to sponsor refugee women and refugee women at risk. So I would like to welcome Beth. Beth, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I am.
Perfect.
I would just like to make a few quick comments, and then I know people are likely busting to ask questions.
Sure.
Our group is 21 years old. We're in Saskatoon. Our group is called Nest Saskatoon. Our website is nestsaskatoon.net if anyone wants to look us up. Our mandate from the get-go has been to sponsor refugee women at risk and their families. And the reason we made this decision a long time ago is we felt this group was likely the most vulnerable group among refugees. And we didn't see anyone else in our city making that their primary mandate. And the third reason is we're a group of about 30 people, and all of us, except for one, are women. So it just seemed to be a really natural fit. That said, we moved about 3 years ago to starting to sponsor dual parent families rather than single parent women, because we just couldn't find enough profiles through the BVOR program to sponsor. And so I'm really interested in this presentation today to learn that about half of the refugees are female. And, you know, on International Women's Day here, I think it would be very interesting for all of us to commit to ensuring that there is equality in the number of refugee profiles. We're seeing equality among dual-headed families and single-parent-headed families, because I know here in Saskatoon, we would love to sponsor more single-parent families. We just haven't been able to find them. I'm not sure if others want to ask questions.
Hello. Teresa, are you still on the line?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, I am
perfect.
here.
Perfect. I couldn't see your name didn't pop up. Beth, are you still on the line?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, great. So thank you so much to both Teresa and Beth. I guess we're going to open up the room for discussion, and if you guys have any question, please click on the hand raise button, and then I will unmute you. And please please at the beginning of your question, tell us who is the question for, so we don't all try to answer at once. So the first question is first person is Kathy. Hi, Kathy.